Today we explore a curious case involving a 12-year-old girl and her brutal murder. But can new DNA testing reveal the murderer? Well, the question we're asking is, whatever happened to Marion Brubaker? Welcome to Curious True Crime. Marion was one of 4 sisters born to Ruth and Reverend Claire Brubaker. Marion was eagerly awaiting her 7th grade year in Irvine Middle School. Music was her biggest passion, and she wanted to become a piano teacher. She even sang with her sister at church in a duet the night before. In August of 1962, Marion got on her bike to go to the library because another passion of hers was reading. She loved to read, she loved to learn. So she hopped on her bike and was on her way to the library from her house on Killian Road. She was only about 3 miles away from the library, her house was, so it wasn't a long trek for her. It was even easier for her to go to the library and get books because she had a basket on the front of her bike, so she could just put the books in the basket on the way home. Around 3:30, Marion had picked out all the books and even a card for her mother and was on her way home. She decided to go this secret route to her house that was near a farm field. Unfortunately, Marion didn't know that she was not alone in those woods. Marion's body was still warm when deputies found her. She had only passed about 40 minutes before they got to her. The first person they questioned was actually a 15-year-old boy who found her body. The teenager claimed that he was just in the woods passing by the summer days when he came across a bike that had fallen on the ground, and he claims that he only saw some fruit and some books on the ground in a purse. So he went through the purse to see what was inside. It was nothing of interest, so he just passed on. Which personally I have a hard time believing because Marion would have been right next to her bike. I'm pretty positive she was when she was found, so I have a hard time believing that personally. As the boy walked on, he actually saw a farmer on a tractor, and their eyes met briefly, so he claims. Their eyes met briefly, and then they both went on with their days. The second time he passed by the bike, this time he noticed an almost naked body of Marion on the ground, and frightened, he ran home, told his dad, and his dad is the one who called the sheriff's office. Detectives arrived at the scene, and they found some telling clues. Whoever was in the area had to have known it well, or at least known Marion well, because it wasn't a heavily populated area, and it wasn't a very well-known area. So police were like, whoever did this either had to know the area well or know Marion well. Marion's clothes had all been but removed from her except for her shirt and her bra, which had been hiked up to her neck. Her shorts and her underwear were found across her eyes that were still open. And this led the police to think that the murderer had some sort of guilt or shame for doing what he did, but there were no signs of sexual assault. They think maybe that there wasn't enough time because there had actually been a car accident right by there on Killian Road. So they think that whoever did this just decided it wasn't worth it and ran. The crime scene investigators actually found it really strange that there were no fingerprints on the handlebars or the books or the basket or really anything that Marion would have touched. So they think whoever did this was really quick to erase any sort of evidence that they were there. Then you go back to the teenage boy, and he's looking real suspicious because he's got torn clothes, he's got scratches on his hands and his arms, and his zipper was down. So police were like, you're looking even more suspicious, bro. Like, I don't know about this kid. He was brought to the sheriff's office and interrogated for 10 hours. That is a lot. But I'm glad that they did, because this kid's story started to shift and change because of this. Initially, he claims that he didn't know Marion at all, that she was just some stranger and he'd never seen her before. But he went to the same school as Marion. So the police were like, you have to know her. You went to the same school. You two are nearly in the same grade. You had to have known her. And so the boy admitted that he did actually know Marion. The boy actually confessed to wiping down the crime scene of fingerprints because he had initially touched the items and he regretted doing so after finding Marion's body. So he just thought, what a great idea. I'm going to delete all evidence and, make it so we never catch the murderer. So that was really dumb of him. But he did that to cover his butt. They actually ended up doing a polygraph test on him, and the results were inconclusive. Neighbors would actually tell police that a few years prior in 1960, that same boy was actually accused of molesting a young girl in those same woods. So that's even more suspicious. My suspicion is ringing. Despite all of the weird circumstances with this kid, they didn't have any concrete evidence against him, so unfortunately they couldn't pin the murder on him and the case remained unsolved. 2 years went by and the Summit County Sheriff's Office was under a lot of criticism for not finding out who did it. So that was really difficult for them. There was actually evidence that led police to a little campsite where they found a girly magazine, and they asked the boy about it, and he said that he'd flipped through the magazine, but it wasn't his. It actually ended up being the magazine of a 35-year-old man who claimed that he did see Marion that day, but he didn't know if she was coming or going. Adding to the confusion, the man said that he stepped out of the woods for a minute and saw the farmer on the tractor. But the farmer said he only saw one person that day and he couldn't determine if it was the man or the teenage boy. With so many witnesses and accounts and stuff like that, but no evidence, the case just remained unsolved. They couldn't do anything about it. 2.5 years later, another suspect emerged because he was also in the woods the day of Marion's death. A man named William Lewis was in the woods that same day, and one of the officers claimed that they heard of a tip in the station that someone called and tipped them off that there was this William Lewis guy, that at a bus station he had seen the body of an unalived girl and that he was telling people about it. So that was like super suspicious. But like a ton of other officers said that like they had never heard of this tip, that like they're not even sure it was an actual thing. So like the boy, this Lewis guy's account kept changing, and his mental health was also taken into account. It was said that he was feeble-minded but not violent, so he was looking less guilty by the second. Lewis was actually declared insane and sent to Lima State Hospital. He was not all there mentally, so they just completely denied him as a suspect because at this point, nothing he said could be taken seriously, and his accounts kept changing anyway. However, 50 years later, that's a long time, Detective Larry Brown actually reopened the case. Larry said he wanted to go to the 15-year-old boy's house, who obviously wasn't 15 anymore, and talk to him again because he just found this dude way too suspicious. He failed the polygraph tests. His accounts kept changing. This dude just screams, "It was me." You know what I mean? He's just suspicious all around. Brown also thought about new DNA testing. So he wanted to see if Marion had any DNA under her fingernails. So that way they could possibly identify someone that way. Unfortunately, Brown actually discovered that they initially didn't do a scraping of under Marion's fingernails, which is strange because normally that is like procedure that you would do that, but they didn't. So because of this, he wanted her body to be re-examined and to try and get DNA out of her fingernails to see if they could find anyone based off of that. Unfortunately, when they removed Marion's body to do more testing and whatnot, they actually went to the mortician's grandson, and he said, "You're most likely not going to find anything because my grandfather would have scraped under her fingernails to make her look angelic and pristine. So you most likely will not find any DNA evidence." So that was really disappointing. But because of this, they did end up reaching out to the boy, who now is 67, to talk to him again about what had happened all those years ago. Brown wanted to update the boy, the now man, on the reopening of the investigation and the DNA that they were looking for. And he took it really calmly and still denied his involvement. And he refused to take another polygraph test and decided that he wanted legal representation, and he refused to answer any more questions. So that was disappointing. And also suspicious. I'm just saying. Suspicious. What's even more suspicious, though, is that the now man, who was the boy, Brown found out that he got married to a woman with children, but they quickly ended up getting a divorce because he was accused of sexually assaulting her children. And they wouldn't talk about it, though, because they were dealing with it themselves. They didn't take it to court or anything. So they dealt with it themselves and they never spoke again, which is just another super suspicious thing. Like, hello, this dude screams killer. I don't know. He just screams it to me. And yet another thing that was suspicious was friends of the man would say that when he would get drunk, he would openly talk about Marion's case and just go into weird detail about things. And he would just go on about it. And that's just super weird and suspicious and strange. And they couldn't tell if he would talk about it because of guilt or because of shame, or because he was the primary suspect, and so like it ruined his life. Unfortunately, even though they tried doing all of the DNA testing and whatnot, they found nothing, and the case was just closed again. And Brown knew that the only way Marion's murder would ever be figured out was if they got a confession from a person who directly knew about the murder and in detail. And that most likely that was never going to happen at this point. So that was really disappointing because DNA evidence could have really helped in this case. But unfortunately it was not meant to be. And that's super disappointing, especially for poor Marion. And that is the story of Marion Brubaker. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you could like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, that would be awesome. And remember, stay curious.